Yeah, exactly. What's the best evidence for the Christian God being real?
Best evidence would be the prophecies in the book of Daniel.
I love this particular topic. Which prophecy do you think is pointing towards Jesus?
Well, there's three in there. There's one in
Well,
chapter 2.
I tell you tell
Uh,
me about it. I'm gonna get my Bible. I can hear you while you're talking. I just won't be on screen. Okay.
okay. So there's three in there. There's one in chapter 2, about the stone that's not hewn from any human hand. This is a symbol of the fifth kingdom after the four kingdoms, which conquers all the others. And then it's like a mountain that fills the whole earth. And I see that as the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven on earth, Jesus talks about in the Gospels. I see a fulfillment there. And then there's the one in chapter 7 about the Son of Man being seated at the right hand of the Father. In that same chapter, there's also a prophecy about 11 horns or 11 kings from the fourth kingdom. I think that's a prophecy that refers to the Emperor Vespasian, because he uproots 3 horns or 3 kings before him in the year of the 4 emperors. Um, and yeah, I see that prophecy fulfilled in the Roman Empire's conversion to Christianity. And then there is the prophecy in chapter 9
Mm-hmm.
of the 70 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
In the 7th week specifically, that's a period of 7 years. And we know the Jewish-Roman War lasted 7 years, from 66 AD to 73 AD when Masada fell. And that same chapter says that the sacrifices will end for half the week. And we see that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the middle of the week in the year 70 AD. And so for half that week, half of that 7-year war period, there were no sacrifices. I'm trying to think what else is in there. Oh yeah, it also says an anointed one would be killed before all those things happened.
So pick
So,
your favorite prophecy and we'll talk about it.
um, I guess the 11 horns. So the 11 horns coming from the fourth beast. I say the fourth beast is the Roman Empire.
Why Roman?
11 horns. Huh?
Why Roman Empire?
It says that it'll have iron
Mm-hmm.
teeth and claws, which I see as like iron implements. And we know it's a kingdom. I mean, that much is clear from the prophecy itself, like an empire. Um, and that
I'm saying, why would you think that it's the Romans rather than the Greeks?
I think it's both. I think it was an apocalyptic text written
Both.
during the Maccabean revolt.
How's it both?
And so, was it both? Well, I think it has to do with dual fulfillment or with typology. I think the events of the Maccabean revolt were a foreshadowing or like prefigurement of the events to come.
Well, there's
And I think,
the one thing we agree on. All these prophecies were pointing towards the end of the Maccabean revolt under Antiochus Epiphanes when he was defeated. All of them. Now, the question is whether or not there's a second fulfillment. Now, I think personally that they believed, at least Jesus and his followers believed, that there was a second fulfillment. Do you want to hear my reason why I think that?
sure.
Because Jesus says in Mark, he says, when you see the armies surrounding the city, head for the hills, which is a quotation from the Maccabean revolt in the book of Maccabees. So Jesus knew that this prophecy actually already had an original context, and the original context was the Maccabean revolt. And Josephus talked about this as well. Josephus says that it was primarily fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. So Jesus seems to be under the same impression you are, which is that it actually was already talking about an original context, but now there's a later fulfillment of it, right? But the question I would have is, why would I accept that there's a later fulfillment?
Well, on the surface, I would say, okay, for two reasons. One, it would be that the prophecy in chapter 12
Hmm.
about the resurrection didn't happen.
Yes.
Um,
Do you know why it didn't
so,
happen?
well, I just know that it didn't happen.
Exactly, but do you know why?
Well, why would you say?
Because the book is not true and God isn't real. See, this is the difference between your presupposition and mine. Your presupposition says God must have wrote Daniel or driven Daniel to write Daniel, which means the prophecies must come true somehow. And then when they don't come true, rather than saying, oh, well, shit, I guess Daniel wasn't from God, you're going to say, no, 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 but here's how it could have actually come true as long as we disconnect it from its original context. Whereas as an atheist, I can say, oh, this is not from God.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like that's a more like parsimonious explanation, but that's not like the only reason I would say that there's a double fulfillment.
Sure.
And I also don't think it is a defeater for the book of Daniel, because I think what Daniel's doing there is what like all other prophetic books did in the Old Testament, especially like Jeremiah, where he talks about like, I don't know, there's like some prophecy in there about something that's supposed to happen after the exile but didn't, and then Daniel picks that up. So I think there's
Yeah,
times in the Old Testament where
Daniel
like God sort
does.
of,
Yeah, Daniel's upset that the 70 years of Jeremiah 25 has already passed. And he was expecting, the kingdom to be completely restored and to have the ingathering of all the exiles, and it didn't happen. So he's sitting there in Daniel chapter 9, verse 1, like, what the hell gives? It's like 522. And he's like, what the fuck? The thing didn't happen. And so he's reading the law of Moses and he gets to most likely Leviticus 26. And in Leviticus 26, God is saying, listen, if even after all these curses come upon you, if you don't turn to me, I'll multiply your punishment by 7. So he's like, oh man, the curse of Moses has been poured out against us. It's not going to be 70 years. It's going to be 70 years times 7. It's like, holy shit. So we're actually going to be punished for 490 years. That's the way Daniel, at least whoever wrote Daniel, is justifying this situation, which to me is just another form of coping. Daniel's just like, it didn't happen, so we have to account for it somehow, and that was the way he accounted for it. Of course, the problem with that is roughly 490 years from the beginning of the invasion of Judea, about 605, lands you just after the Maccabean revolt, but nowhere close to the time of Jesus. And it seems to me that the way he did the counting method was a little bit dishonest as well, or he just wasn't trying to be exact. But it's funny if you count it that the first week is running concurrent with the rest of the weeks, with the 69 weeks. It actually comes out that the end of the period is in 171, which is about when Onias III was killed.
yeah. Yeah, oh, I didn't know it lands at 171, but oh, that's interesting.
It
I
depends.
yeah, I,
It depends on how you count it, right? It depends on if you're counting from 605 or 539. I personally think that Daniel had in mind that it would be counting from 605, but there's an argument that it should be counting from 539. But either one of those, whether it's counting from 539 or 605, it doesn't get you anywhere near Jesus.
yeah, I agree. The reason I'm not too concerned by that, because I don't think the writer of Daniel is trying to be exact either. I think the
Right.
number
I
seven is
agree.
just psychologically significant. Yeah, I mean, but and the number 7 I think is significant too. So two reasons why I think there's a double fulfillment. One, like yeah, it's the fact that the resurrection didn't happen. I don't think the book of Daniel necessitates that it needs to happen. I think what's happening there is it's more just like wartime rhetoric. Like he's saying, this is why we suffer the persecution, because our ultimate hope is the resurrection. He's like juxtaposing that with the kind of persecution they're facing.
Well,
Um,
do you know who I think the target of Daniel 7 and 12 are? Because I think Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 3, and Daniel chapter 12 are all talking about the same person. And it appears that that person is Michael the archangel. He's the one that's going to receive the kingdom. He's the prince. In fact, he's in the book of Daniel, he's referred to as an angel. He's referred to as a man, and he's referred to as a prince.
How is he referred to as a prince?
Uh,
Oh, the prince that will come, or
He's referred to as a prince in a couple different places. In fact, Gabriel is mentioned as a prince too. So at the time Daniel was written, it was very common to refer to the angels as princes. But and that's because the angels were tasked with managing or overseeing various nation groups, which we see in Psalm 82. But I think the most clear form that this shows up is Daniel chapter 10, verse 20. And I'll put it on the screen. I don't know if you have a Bible with you, but I'll put it on the screen so you can see it.
I appreciate that. No, I don't. I mean, I would have to open another app when I do that.
Right, because you're in the car. I assumed, yeah, you only had your phone on you. So if you go to Daniel 10:20, actually, we'll start in 18. It says, again, one in human form touched me and strengthened me, and he said, do not fear, greatly beloved, you are safe. Be strong and courageous. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is no one with me who contends against these princes except Michael, your prince. So these angels or these princes are tasked as like being the overseers of the various people groups. And Michael is essentially the archangel that eventually defeats all of them. That's why in chapter 12, verse 1, let me grab chapter 12, 1, says, at that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. And there shall be a time of anguish, such as has never occurred since the nations first came into existence. But at the time the people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And I think this prince, this man-like prince figure, who's also an angel, I think is the target of Daniel chapter 7, the one that is like the Son of Man, is in fact Michael the archangel. It says, as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven. This is exactly the way Michael the archangel and the other angels are described.
Coming with clouds of heaven is how the other angels are described.
Yeah, all the angels are described as being in the clouds of heaven with God.
I don't know that all the angels. I mean, implicitly, yeah. I mean, they're in the heavens, right? Mm-hmm. But I think, like, if you read the rest of Daniel 7, the archangel one of the angels interprets this dream for Daniel. I don't know if it's Gabriel or Michael, but he says that the Son of Man character, he tells who it is. And I think originally, in its original context, it's like a personification of the kingdom of Israel. And so the Messiah is sort of seen that way, as like, because you can't have a kingdom without a king. And so it was interpreted messianically in the time of Jesus and by even Jews today.
Well, there's a lot of passages that are interpreted as being messianic by Jewish people, except that's very tenuous at the time of Jesus because, I mean, half of the Sanhedrin didn't even believe in the prophets. So the Sadducees believed that the only thing God ever gave was the Torah, didn't even believe in the prophetic books. And so they certainly didn't have this view of a Messiah that the other Jewish people did. Now, the Pharisees had a view of a Messiah, but they couldn't agree on who he was, when he was going to come, how many there would be, what he would do. If they did anything, they disagreed. That's all they could do is disagree. There's
I mean,
mm-hmm.
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, they disagreed, but I think one thing they agreed on would be this sort of reading of Daniel, even if it wasn't like. I think that's at least one thing that was popular back then, that was at least in vogue. That idea, right? That every Jew back then was like, almost nearly every Jew back then was looking forward to the restoration of the kingdom of Israel, this new David that was coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't, like, if you're a Jew, even living during the time of the Maccabees, you can't read that text about this Son of Man coming and restoring the kingdom of Israel in any other way except messianically.
Well, I think you
You know what I
can
mean?
because it doesn't say a son of man. It says one
What,
one like a human being. One like a son of man, which is the angel. In fact, in Daniel chapter 3, when it says that there was one like the Son of God inside of the fiery furnace, that same paragraph calls him an angel.
okay.
Like there's this idea that the angels, also the princes, are very godlike and very manlike. They're like some sort of a in between God and man, which is very common in the time period. If you read the literature from the time period, like in the Apocrypha, you'll find this type of language about angels pretty widely established.
Okay. I mean, I see your point. I don't know if the point here you're making is that it actually is about Michael the Archangel, or if it's ambiguous enough to be anyone. I mean, is that actually your position?
No, my position is that the original intention of these prophecies was to paint Michael as the one who is like a human being, but is also coming on the clouds with the Father once he defeats the other angels that are behaving wickedly. That's why he's got to fight against the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. We've got these rebellious angels, as they're described in Psalm 82. And because they're rebellious, they have to be put down. God says in Psalm 82 that even though you are gods, you're going to die like mortals.
Yeah, in one of the Psalms, yeah, where he's addressing the angels. I agree.
Right, yeah. Psalm 82.
Yeah, I see your point. I think it just, I don't, so when I read the text, like, and I guess that's the way apocalypses are written in general, is like, they're written to be fluid enough to where it can, or it means many different things. Like, you have one symbol represent multiple things.
So that's not a incorrect point, and that's one of the purposes. That's one of the reasons why apocalyptic literature tends to be vague, is because when it doesn't come true, you have plausible deniability. Well, it obviously wasn't talking about this; it must be talking about something else. That's why the Book of Revelation is so enigmatic, because like no one really knows exactly what the author was thinking because it's so vague. And it's hard to pin down exactly what the author is referring to. But if you're writing apocalyptic literature about the end of the age, you need it to be that, because if it doesn't come to an end when you predicted, you needed some kind of deniability to say, well, it actually didn't mean that. It must mean something else.
I don't think like that was the intent. I mean, I think the person who wrote Daniel obviously believed that the end was coming. I don't think he was trying to afford himself plausible deniability. I think he saw like his moment in history as the climax of history, of human history.
Well, that is possible, but I don't know if that's entirely true. And because I don't think there was a single author to Daniel. I think it had probably 4 different authors. It's written in 3 different languages. In fact, we've got other Greek additions to Daniel that we found among Dead Sea Scrolls. They were adding to this book hundreds of years after the supposed Daniel even lived. That's why in the book of Daniel, they get history wrong. They don't know anything about what's happening in Daniel's time period, but they know everything about the 2nd century. They get all the details in the 2nd century right, even what king is sleeping with who and what king had an alliance with what other king and why they had an alliance with them. But like, I think the biggest proof that this was written in the 2nd century is it just doesn't know who Nebuchadnezzar's family is. The father of Belshazzar in history was not Nebuchadnezzar. They're not even related. They're separated by 4 different individuals, and the father of Belshazzar is King Nabonidus. Nabonidus had no blood relation to Nebuchadnezzar whatsoever. In fact, he came to the throne with much trouble.
Wait, so you're saying the Book of Daniel claims that Nabonidus is Belshazzar's grandson, or
No, it claims that Nebuchadnezzar is the father of Belshazzar, and he's not. Nabonidus is.
it says that he's the father. Interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it said that Nabonidus was his father, and that was historically verified.
No, Nabonidus doesn't show up in the Bible anywhere. He's not mentioned.
Okay.
But that is the father.
Yeah. Yeah, so I heard that. What I heard, this is my understanding, is like that, yeah, after Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus was in charge, but then he left to go pray to some goddess in the land of Israel, like the goddess of sin or something, and then Belshazzar like acted as king in his place, and that's when the Persians invaded. And I think that's also why he promises Daniel that you'll be third in the kingdom.
Right. Like so what you're referring to is the Nabonidus Chronicle. There is something we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls referred to as the Nabonidus Chronicle, and it details the story of Nabonidus kind of going off into the wilderness for a period of, I think, 7 years, who he kind of lost his mind. The kingdom kind of fell into shambles while he was gone, and then his son Belshazzar, who was co-regent, took over for him while he was gone. The Bible co-opts that story and says it was actually Nebuchadnezzar, not Nabonidus, who it happened to. But that's, according to the tradition and the history that we have, that just simply isn't the case. And there were 3 different kings between Nabonidus and Nebuchadnezzar. So like there's just no relationship between Nabonidus and Nebuchadnezzar. They had no family ties.
I'll have to look into that, because like I think Daniel is using older sources. Like there's not only a Nabonidus Chronicle, there's like another one. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is the Nabonidus Chronicle. I don't know, among the Dead Sea Scrolls that talks about Daniel.
Well, there's the Nabonidus Chronicle, and then there's also the Nabonidus Cylinder. And they're a little bit different. The Nabonidus Cylinder is older, and it contains one of the prayers of Nabonidus. In fact, I've got a copy of it. Hold on, let me pull it up.
The prayers of Nabonidus, that's what I was talking about, yeah.
Right. So in the prayer of Nabonidus, it actually lists some of the kings, but one of the important parts is when we go down to the end of the text. It says, "As for me, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead, and grant me, as a present, a life of long days. And as for Belshazzar, the eldest son, my offspring, instill reverence for your great Godhead in his heart." And so here's one other place where Nabonidus is being listed as the father of Belshazzar, and there are others.
Okay.
In fact, we've got inscriptions from the temple accountants, I guess you would call them accountants, where they just document on clay tablets who gave what to the temple fund. And we've got 2 different inscriptions where it says that Belshazzar, the son of the king, and then it names some names here, they received the tithe, as it's called, on the 29th day of Elul in the 5th year of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. Then we've got another inscription that says basically the same thing: 2 shekels of silver to Danu Ahi Shu Abini, the son of Nergal Abulit, who to the son of the king Belshazzar is sent. Then it says on the 7th day of Tammuz, the 9th year of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. So we've got like lots of textual evidence demonstrating that Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar. I would expect this information to be known to Daniel, yeah.
So I think, yeah. So he knew that Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar, even though he's not explicitly mentioned in the text. I think he would have also known.
I don't think he knew that. That's what I'm saying. Because he calls Nebuchadnezzar the father of Daniel.
Well, Abraham's also referred to as the father of the Jews in a lot of places, no?
But he was the ancestor of all the Jews. He is the father.
Yeah. So isn't it referring to Nebuchadnezzar in the same way?
Nebuchadnezzar was not related whatsoever to Nabonidus. There's no blood connection there.
Oh, I see your point.
You see what I'm saying? They had no family connection. Nabonidus came to the throne as an outsider.
Well, maybe that's like historically what happened, but is that how Nabonidus spun it himself? Like, didn't he claim to be just dynastically related to Nebuchadnezzar in some way to legitimize his throne? Maybe that's the
No,
tradition.
no, not only that. Actually, Nabonidus's mother left. I'm going to call them prayers. That's the best way to put it. Nabonidus, his own mother, left prayers or wrote prayers, thanking the specific gods for elevating him to the throne, even though he wasn't in the lineage. Like we have data from his own family, basically saying, "Hey, even though he wasn't in line, God made it so."
Hmm. Yeah, so I would have to look into that more, but um, that can mean two things, right? It can mean that the writer of Daniel was just ignorant about that fact, or it could just reflect a different understanding of fatherhood. Maybe he's father by adoption, and he's in the legacy or lineage of Nebuchadnezzar, not through blood, but through other means. Again, I don't know, that kind of stuff gets fuzzy, there's a lot of emperors
But
that weren't related to Julius Caesar who were emperor,
yeah,
so I mean,
but we have no material evidence that would suggest that Nebuchadnezzar adopted anybody in Nabonidus's family.
okay, fair. Um, yeah, that's just something I'll have to look into on my own. But we kind of got down a rabbit hole about that. You said there was another thing you said um, about like Daniel getting history wrong. Um, well, regardless, like whether the Son of Man is like Daniel thought he was, the Archangel Michael, or a personification of the kingdom of Israel, or this Messianic king that was to come. I think all those readings are valid. Um, the main reason I think there's a double fulfillment, and the main reason Josephus thought there was a double fulfillment, was just the fact that like there's so much in the book of Daniel that aligns with history in the first century. And Jesus himself, I think it's fair to say that historical Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man, and that those prophecies in the book of Daniel were reaching their true fulfillment in his time.
So I
And
agree with you. Yeah, there's a lot of people in the first century that wanted Daniel to be completely fulfilled in the second century when Antiochus Epiphanes was overthrown. And when it didn't come true the way it was told, they said, well, we're just going to push the date back. And that's in fact what all the messianic prophecies are going through. If you read the context of the messianic prophecies, it's actually quite clear that most of them kind of have a time period in mind. And when it didn't come true, the Jewish people were like, well, God's not going to leave us high and dry. He'll make it come true eventually. To me, this is just practicing cognitive dissonance. You're like saying, well, because some of the Jews believed that it was going to be fulfilled later, even though it didn't say that, we should accept the claim. But I mean, I don't accept the claim. Like, if the author said that something was going to happen after Antiochus Epiphanes was overthrown, and then it didn't happen, to me, that just demonstrates it's not from God. I'm not going to bend over backwards to say that it was like spiritually fulfilled by somebody else later.